Amazing. Should we start? I feel like that's a good intro. Is everybody ready?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. We'll just quickly introduce myself, Laura, the Executive Director of LAND, Los Angeles Nomadic Division. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you were all able to watch the premiere of the new film that premiered last night on our website. Really quickly, I just want to give a quick land acknowledgement. Land acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples. This afternoon, this is our second part of the presentation of Nomadic Nights with Guadalupe Rosales. Thank you to all of the artists for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to hand it over to Matthew Schum, who was the curator of this project with Guadalupe and worked closely on realizing this really ambitious video project. So, if anyone has questions, we invite you to use the Q&A function. Hugo Cervantes, Land's curatorial associate, will be monitoring that and can make sure that those are addressed. We will have a Q&A portion towards the end of the hour, but I think it's just going to be a pretty organic conversation. And yeah, I'll turn it over. Thank you all.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you to our artists for joining the panel, and of course for working with Guadalupe Rosales to create Channel Flip, Meet Me at the Edge of the Sun. We're going to have an artist talk here that's pretty open, that starts with Lupe, who created this work, and goes through some themes that are inside of the actual video, and some themes that were pre-existing in each of the artists' work. So I want to start with you, Lupe, and just give some people some background here, because when I invited you to do this work, I thought it would just be you and I working together. And you quickly came back with this other idea to create a live event of performers. And you already had these 4 performers in mind. And you wanted to work with some themes, but I think the first one to start with was that also relates to your archive is just the idea of your art as a collective dialogue. So can you say more about what you were thinking when we first spoke in January?
Mm-hmm. First of all, hi everyone. Matthew and I have been having this conversation since January, I think. And it was supposed to be a live performance. We're in the middle of looking for a venue. When Matthew invited me to work on this project, I was thinking about bringing live performances, inviting people who I truly respect as artists, and also who use their bodies, you know, to touch difficult topics that push boundaries. And I, you know, automatically thought of Nao, MPA, Rafa, and Zackary. And, but you know, prior to that, I had been photographing this like nocturnal life in Los Angeles. And the reason why I was really interested in doing these photographs was because I felt like there was something that the nightlife wasn't really being acknowledged as part of Los Angeles. You know, it was like when you look at an image of Los Angeles, it's always this like beautiful LA sunset, the beach. And for me, I wanted to like also talk about my experiences at night, which is also like very melancholic, but also, you know, having good memories of spending my time at night. And so then, you know, things were shifting with this project that was supposed to be a live performance. Then it became a video piece. And, you know, everything shifted because of the pandemic. And then we were also hit with the Floyd's murder and the protests and everything. So then we had to adapt to our current times. But I was still really interested in having these conversations around violence, you know, like bringing in the artist to make work in response to that. And so then the work that I was supposed to do moved into video, which is also something that I had been interested in doing anyway, because I had been doing these like cinematic night shots. And I wanted to continue that conversation and how to like bring these to life, in other words. So that I continued to do that. I shot at night with Vish, and he and I went back to East LA, back to my where I grew up in the area, by like Whittier Boulevard, the alleyways, and I wanted to capture the essence of my neighborhood, which is also talking about trauma and violence that I experienced. And in some way, something that I also wanted to mention was that when I was growing up in East LA, it almost like violence almost became normalized. But now as an artist and bringing in artists, I wanted to question that. Like, why do we normalize? What is it? How do we release trauma? Specifically because I'm in a place where I can talk about it, but it's because I have this outlet, which is my art practice, to be able to like talk about this nuance. Then again, I'm really interested in how other people release violence, how we talk about it. And this is why I brought the artists that are part of this project.
Mm-hmm. And so this gets into some things that relate to your archival practice. A lot of people might know your work through that, and you use social media, but you've also, created exhibitions. But for you, the archive is a collective dialogue in the same way that this video was a collective dialogue
Mm-hmm.
between the 4 artists here. And your idea is the body as not merely some sort of vehicle, but it's an experience of place. It's a receptacle. It's a relinquery of some sort. So can you talk more about embodied experience and this idea of the body? Because you're not really talking about memory. It's not necessarily a cerebral process that you're thinking about when you talk about performance and the people that you wanted to collaborate with here.
Mm-hmm. When I talk about the body, it's because I do see our bodies as these like containers that just hold on to, and yes, I did focus on trauma and violence because I do keep thinking about my cousin's death, and that's another location that I started photographing at night. And when I think about his death, I think about like his blood being left in this land, like his body was left in the baseball field in the middle of the night. And every time that I go visit this area, I think about his blood still being there. So I do think a lot about our bodily fluids as a way to release energies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talk about it in this kind of surreal way, a kind of George Bataille way, where you're talking about the release of fluids, whether it's tears or urine, and this idea of breaking through our boundaries, this idea of moving past the barrier of our skin. And I think that you even talked about these artists, and you talk about the body as well as a channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's also because I'm not an artist. So, but I definitely think that artists, and even so, performance art, I see that as, as people that can channel difficult topics, even that are difficult for myself. And when I collaborate, I've collaborated with Rafa before, and he and I have had conversations around this. So it's always like this like dialogue that we have. And I wanted to treat this project as that as well.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to invite Rafa now or MPA to jump in here. The 3 of you dealt with bodily fluids in different ways inside of the video that's included in Channel Flip. And I'd be happy to hear from any of you about the work that you made. And before I do, I just want to make sure everyone knows that we have a 4th artist who couldn't join us today, who was part of Channel Flip, Zackary Drucker. So now, Rafa or MPA, I wonder if you could tag on how you used fluids in your work. Now, do you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, I was curious actually more about Guadalupe's notion of not being an artist and sort of what was attached there or not attached there, how you see yourself as not an artist.
No, I'm an artist, but I'm not a performer.
Ah, okay. Not
I'm
yet, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I just want to clarify that I
Okay,
do
yeah, because I was like,
am an
what's going
artist.
on here? Is this an elitist rejection of the title art, which is, you know, something that I could relate to?
No, I guess I want to say that as an artist, I've found myself being able to talk and amplify this nuance and ask questions.
Yeah. Well, I could talk a little bit, but hopefully, you know, we could do something that's more like a dialogue, where we can sort of talk to each other, talk over each other. I'm fine being interrupted, so go for it. I guess that, you know, when we started this project, yeah, it was a performance project, and sometimes, like, I'm always, thank you for inviting me. I'm always super grateful for getting invited to do anything. I've been making art for like 30 years, and I'm still surprised when people invite me to do anything. So thank you, Guadalupe and Matthew, for including me in this awesome group of people.
Thank you.
And I really love the kind of process of just, you know, talking about things, because when we first started, we were sort of, you know, we kind of entered into this pandemic space. And I think initially we were all dealing with our own versions of that and what that meant, and coming together to talk about that, but then also think about art and think about how we could transition from a performance live space to a video space was really, really great for me, because it kind of gave me like something to hang on to, a moment to hang on to. And the other thing I was really hanging on to was like cooking and doing all this insane processing and cooking. And I noticed that a lot of people were doing that also via sourdough. So I had that sourdough bread making ASMR video that was presented, and I guess it's still available via the link. And so I was thinking about that kind of trauma and connecting to these kind of processes that make us feel safe or feel like we're doing something, or make us feel like we're doing something for other people, whether we are or not. It's a kind of way of grounding or anchoring ourselves, you know, in our bodies. And so I was also kind of conflating that with this origin story myths. I've been working on these different kind of projects around Mayan origin stories, and one origin story is a woman goddess who cries so much because she's lonely, and she makes enough snot to like form a mate that she could then be with and mate with, and that's how the human race begins. And so it's sort of conflating that story with bread making. And as we were shooting, this whole story of the whole ice skating thing came up, which wasn't planned, but then it kind of connected with Rafa's video in a way. So there was different ways, I think, in which all our videos started to connect, either through this kind of universalism sort of thing, or through the process of talking and then making. And I loved when we were all texting each other and we were like, hey, I'm making my video tonight. Oh my God, I'm so freaked out. And, you know, like all of our
insecurity. Smoke machine. And then there was smog, the smoke, somebody had literally the liquid and somebody else had the machine.
Yeah, I was trying to get the fog machine, and one person had the fog machine, one person had the juice. So there was this whole kind of coming together. But then in the middle of all that, of course, May 25th, when George Floyd lost his life to police violence, I think that this whole other kind of violence thing sort of took hold, you know, obviously to everybody, which was this idea of this systematic violence that had been there all the time and it had been present all the time, suddenly was, you know, blaringly visible again to everybody in this very accessible way. And I found it was really difficult to go forward with my project because I just felt really hopeless at certain points, and like what I was doing, you know, didn't have importance at certain points. And, you know, just like everything just became much harder. So I was really grateful to the post-production team, Chelsea Knight and Matthew Hijinks, who helped with and, you know, finished off the editing and the sound mixes and the titling and everything, because it just became like, I don't know, I just got so depressed after that.
But you know, now Chelsea shared with me on one of our post-production meetings this amazing phrase. And she said that you were talking earlier that morning or the day before, and it was right after George Floyd had been killed. And the idea of social violence, police violence, other forms of violence, that you were actually tying the sourdough phenomenon during COVID into this. And she used this wonderful phrase I'm going to share here, that it's a kind of cultural psychosis disguised as a fetish, that the sourdough and the fetish sort of takes the place of this larger void that's created by these larger structural issues.
Yeah, thank God for other people, or thank the goddess for other people who can mirror like that, we could mirror each other and, you know, bring back these spaces of communication. Thank you for that, Matthew.
Mm-hmm. And
I did
Rafa,
wanna
you have
say-
these, oh, sorry, Lupe.
No, I did want to say something about just like stuff that what now I just brought up is that my experience, you know, shooting East LA, going back to my old neighborhood, wanting to capture what it felt like for me when I was 16, you know, a teenager in the 90s, and then almost being 40 now, and experience like revisiting these traumas, these you know, like the violence that I've experienced when I was growing up as a teenager. And like for me it was like the same thing is happening over again, you know. So for me, I did have to like be really conscious of PTSD, you know, like it was like what I was carrying in my body that I hadn't felt in over 20 years. And that shift was really really like stood out to me a lot, you know, because I'm over here shooting at midnight in East LA, and then the following day I want to shoot like at a sunset, and that same day, which is I believe a Wednesday, 2 days after Floyd was murdered, I'm confronted by the police, and that's one of the shots. So that's where everything, you know, I just continued to shoot, and that's what the project ended up being, or at least my piece. So it's almost like a documentation of or recording of time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you did describe, to go back to the archive that you created, that the party scene that you have based the collection on, that scene was a kind of a survival mode, that the party equaled a kind of survival, and obviously that could, you know, relate to something like PTSD.
Right. Yes. I mean, these parties were, you know, in the midst of gang violence and police brutality. They were considered safe spaces for people or people of color. You know, I always think about us saying that we had to break the law to survive, and that's what we were doing. You know, even being policed by how we dressed. You know, like anyway. So we can keep going on that, but that's, you know, it's we're almost like we're in it again, and anyway. So I don't know if you guys want to jump in on that.
Well, we're still there, and the machines that are responsible for reporting are also kind of like shaping these narratives, right? They're continuing to criminalize youth of color, Black and brown folks, indigenous people. You know, I think it's both like a really eerie and awkward thing to kind of like talk about trauma when you're also just still kind of like in the midst of it. And hearing you talk about like bodily fluids and your cousin's blood on the ground and his body on the ground, and thinking of the many bodies that have been on the ground due to gun violence and police violence in particular. Andres Guardado, rest in peace. It's relentless, right? It's relentless. And I'm super grateful for like the way in which you really are invested in being in conversation and bringing people to be in conversation, because we don't really have to look far to find voices that provide options for us to cope and to heal. I was thinking of Patrice Cullors, who's a friend of many of ours, and her tweeting, "Abolition is not a rhetoric. Abolition is not rhetoric. Abolition is not rhetoric." And it reminded me of something she had said before: practice, 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 right? And this sort of ambivalence and this doubt that we have as makers, right? If what we're doing is enough, if it's the right thing to do. And this space that you've held for everyone has been such a vital space for me personally to come into and to be involved in making something that could help me kind of like think of from the very kind of like minute ways in which our worlds have been turned upside down by pandemic and by violence, state-sanctioned violence. And for me, that was like, for me, it's always a way of building a relationship to material, building a relationship to space. And I think for me, when we started this conversation, we were maybe a couple of weeks into pandemic, and I was just kind of like thinking a lot about how our own bodily fluids become kind of like weaponized against us. And so I had already started to collect saliva at that point and continue to collect it to freeze into balls that I would then sort of like juggle as part of this performance. Obviously thinking about like desire, right? And how desire and connecting with people in certain ways could be one way of coping with the situation. And so being left alone with your body and to think about like what's in your body, like what comes into your body fugitively, what exits your body in the same way, and how could these things, and how these things are actually harmful to one another. It made me really think a lot about care, right? And this deep moment of sort of like introspection to really think of like, imagine other ways of caring for ourselves, but also caring for each other, and practicing that, you know, like really literally putting it into practice. This has been like such an incredible moment to, I think, as makers, be imagining, you know, the world that we want to exist in and to do it, just put it into action. So again, I just wanted to express gratitude for everyone for holding the space and for holding the chats via text.
It's interesting, Rafa, when I hear you say that, because it's almost like we couldn't see the video that was made, you know, like we're all sitting here now with this video with all of our pieces together, but we did not actually start ever really having that in mind. That just found itself becoming. And when you talked about care, it's almost like our artworks care for each other in that video, because they seem to they had this strange unconscious balancing for each other, like where one might become have a bit of alliteration, someone else takes a bit of abstraction, someone else might get a little more sexy while someone else holds the gaze. You know, there's this kind of beautiful, like I think unconscious part of our making that is so nice, that happens through kinship. And in this pandemic, you know, we were challenged about the physicalities of our kinship being able to express each other. And I know a lot of folks want to keep demanding the problems of art, but all I keep seeing is art as a space is not a problem. There's no problems to the making. And when now there's this great anecdote in now storytelling where grief is creation, right? The tears create. And I kept taking that with me these weeks of that. I feel that the dominant narrative and militaristic thinking wants to say bang, explode, and it's gone. But most of us know that that's not real. That's not reality at all. That's just the illusion to perpetuate ideas of success and destruction. But, you know, we're all resting on not 400 years of 400 to 500 years of oppression, we're also resting on 400 to 500 years of uprising and rebellion. And that's in our bodies. And that did not die. As much as something keeps coming for us, or another wave keeps coming, and another, the uprisings are here because the uprisings have been here as long as this destruction has come to visit our bodies, and lands. And this grief is one of our creations, or one of our instruments to creating. And it was so beautifully named in Nao's storytelling, and was named by a lot of the conversations we were having, that, like, I would hear Lupe say, or I would even observe you, Lupe, like, your camera has this magnet, it can't leave East LA. Your camera keeps pulling you back to East LA. It's like that tool in you, it's like, you're driving right there to that spot wherever, may he rest in peace, lay, or like these, when we talk about these fluids, like, what is this alchemy and this collective unconscious and these magnetisms, that we lack vocabulary for, so then we have to create other ways. And I guess in me, I've always had this explosion energy, but we could sit here and unpack that, like, is the explosion energy because I'm an accomplice to the destructive forces of, white supremacy married to patriarchy, married to wealth supremacy? Yes. And those destructive forces are also there because of the history and my accompliceness to the rebellion and the uprisings. But I'd like to, of course, like, continue to train that energy to lead itself to the non-deaths, right? To the pieces that they think that they kill in us, but we keep living. And this other thing came up about how do we release trauma. Lupe kept asking us this question. I mean, like, oh God, oh no, but art's always been the place. And I know now, and Rafa and Zackary, I mean, these are like, we've been around, and I've seen your bodies in great acts that look like high risk for people. And I know that for me personally, it's like the art has always been the place to go test things that I might not do literally in real life. So I don't necessarily going to go build a bomb, but maybe I've made several works that want to explore the desire to destroy the destroyer.
Yeah, can you, I don't want to misquote you, but I know that you mentioned the dead live in the living. Am I saying that correct, MPA?
That's so cool that you bring that up. It's like, yeah, I guess it's like my big takeaway from our dialogues is like, that the death lives in the living, but the dead do die.
Yeah. And I definitely think about that a lot, especially when we talk about fluids, and then, like, in us, even, I guess I can say this about the work that I've been doing, that I do see it as like this bridge from, like, connecting the living and the dead, like this bridge that, or at least for my when I do work and I talk about my cousin's death, and I go photograph this location where he was murdered. And again, like, I also think about the blood that has been shed on on the streets, and like that to me is a reminder that the dead are still here. And I think when I started this archive and people started donating material, I remember a woman donated a sweatshirt from her son that had been murdered when he was 15. This is in 1996. And she gave me, he was a raver, from the party scene, and he had a beaded necklace with a whistle. And she's like, here, this is my son's. He was killed outside of a party. I haven't washed, like, there was a sweater that he used to practice on. He's a breakdancer. So there was a lot, it still had dirt in it, stains, and his whistle. And she told me, he's like, I know that like his fluids are still there, you know, like the whistle still carries his saliva, even though like 20 plus years have passed. So that is what I'm really interested in, because these archives, our bodies are not just like objects, you know, they're relics. They carry energy. We continue to like carry the dead even. And that is what I'm really interested in. This is why I wanted to like have this conversation with all of you, and to use our bodies in this way. And now I don't know if this was like intentional, if you thought about this, but when I was looking at your video, I thought a lot about healing, and, you know, whether it's like a path to heal, or maybe ignoring healing. You know, when people are like, I'm just gonna like distract myself from doing this thing, you know, to like heal. So instead I'm gonna go cook and keep myself busy. And that's what I thought a lot, because I know people that have done things like this, you know, that they're like, I'm just gonna keep going, like just keep going forward. And that's how we survived. That's how a lot of my friends survived. Just ignore what happened.
I think a lot of that, yeah, I think that was very present in the video. But also I was interested in kind of, I guess, transforming that space of like, just keep going, to the space of alchemy where actual healing could happen. And there could be, you know, it's so hard because I think as, you know, I think that I've been dealing also with my own version of like inner white guilt or something, which is this idea that, you know, like, even though I'm, you know, obviously or not obviously white, I don't know which is which, but, you know, I was raised in a way, like my parents went to segregated schools and were like, they were punished for speaking Spanish. And so I'm the youngest of 6, and they raised us in a kind of a similarist way, so that, you know, we wouldn't have, so we wouldn't have like Mexican accent or whatever. And it's sort of like, you know, it's like people went from being a similarist to being able to code switch. And now I think we're more in a moment of simultaneity, right? Where we're kind of living all these experiences at once. But I was, you know, back to this kind of faux white guilt or whatever, the idea that I am so privileged that I could be in my home and bake or something like that while people are really struggling or putting their lives on the line or out in the street protesting. Like, that wasn't lost on me, that kind of experience of survival. And I think that there are these kind of gray areas between like survival, silence, making, you know, who you're amplifying. But I also know that I've, through my cooking, through my baking, through my art, through my, you know, programming and teaching, all these different ways that I have been consciously active and been consciously practicing activism. So I know that that is there for me, you know, personally, that I have a relationship to activism. You know, I was brought up in the UFW, in the United Farm Workers Movement and that kind of thing as a kid. So I'm very like, in that part of myself is very embedded, but I definitely was tapping into this kind of, there's a kind of guilt associated also with survival itself, right? With being a survivor, like survivor's guilt, and sort of associating that with this idea of baking sourdough bread at home, but really wanting to get to that also transformative space of being alone and being left with your thoughts and being left with whatever you're doing, and how at times your own self, your own mind can interrupt that process of survival to elevate you to a space of thriving. And also how there's also guilt associated with that. Like, you know, obviously I have like the Catholic guilt thing sort of in my bones, and I can't, you know, so wanting to kind of explore that. But originally we were trying to shoot that last dance scene in the yard with a fire, and it was supposed to be kind of like really surreal, where I would be like pulling the bread out of a fire we'd built, and it was going to be very kind of witchy. But, you know, it was like 4 in the morning, and we were it was me, Marcus Quila-Nazario, and Heather Axe were my quarantine pod and my creative team. And, you know, the works, you know, I know how it is. Work looks so simple and like, oh yeah, you just set up the camera and shoot. But then like actually getting, you know, the right shot and the right sound and the right whatever, even as low budget, low pressure as this was, you know, by the time we would get set up and everything, you know, it would already be late, and then we'd be shooting. We shot 2 nights. The first night till like 3 in the morning, and I think the second night I went to bed at 5. By the time we shot the disco scene in the kitchen, we were ready to do it. We were like, okay, you know, the fire was all set up. All they have to do is light the match. We'll go out there. We don't care. It's 4 in the morning. We're going to shoot this. And then we started playing with the lights in the kitchen. And I was like, you know what? It's the same thing. Like, let's just do it here because we're all set up. And I was like really like on my last legs. And I think that that's part of my framework for making too, is like I always have to get to the point where I'm totally gonna have a breakdown, like where I'm exhausted, or I'm gonna trip on something and bust my face open or something. Like there's a part of me that, you know, I have to push myself to that point or I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Like it's psychotic. And I know that it's psychotic, but it's like, that's the only way I know how to make is, you know, to push to that point. And whether or not it's visible in the product that everyone sees, like that's, you know, that's real. I wanted to just go back. There was a question from somebody in the chat, from Rigo saying, I'm interested in what MPA mentioned about real life, where she would say the line is drawn. And I think I picked up on that too, MPA. It was a moment when you were talking and you said, you know, I'm not going to go make a bomb in real life, but I can in art. And then, so I think maybe the question has to do with like, is, you know, like art real life, or like, I don't know, maybe that's where I think that's what they were kind of picking up on.
Well, it's interesting because I was just thinking about what you were bringing up about your process and thinking, wow, well, live art and performers, we are kind of flex because we make, even if we spend a lot of time in the process to make up to a still deadline, you know, our art's very present and it's still determined by that actuality of the moment that we all gather in its liveness. But of course, the challenge here was that, to be clear, folks, like this was actually supposed to be live performance in a warehouse, land, you know, works that way, they get spaces. And so to me, it was very new to switch over to video, and I definitely had a few flops. I don't need to like go into it, but I was like, what is this thing, this video? But I guess what I mean by that is I think art is another language. And I think I'm gonna go and be as presumptuous and arrogant as I think it is this, I think it's an initial language. I think humans are expressive beings. I think
you mean like the original language?
I wouldn't say original. I'm gonna say it's initial. It like could be a first language.
Do you think art is the first language? Is that what you're saying?
I think that we humans in our species, we express. You making bread is an expression. Now we might not name it art anymore, you know, but we find ourselves needing to express. Even as children, we go to draw in the sand, you know, we find ourselves needing to make these expressions. And so what I mean by like, yes, no, art is real, but it also has evolved to have these like these poetic faculties to it. So we get to use metaphor and abstraction and imagination to as a tool chest. So we don't necessarily have to be this, you know, here, we don't have to be the concrete reality that says it's dominant. We get to be art. I mean, this title of this piece, and Lupe keeps talking about channel. I really feel that art is that highway frequency. And hopefully some of our art catches other people into our frequencies, you know, and can disrupt that dominant other reality that tries to tell us it rules, you know? And
I think when I first started making performance, I definitely felt that channeling aspect of making art. Sort of felt like I was expressing things that I couldn't express through other ways, and that it was kind of more like I was connecting to something, it was coming out of me. So I totally get what you're saying in that way.
You know, it's so, Tupac's birthday just passed a few days ago. And I was watching this interview, and he said, you know, they were interviewing him about the lyrics in his music.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, listen, I've been beat up by the police, I've been arrested, I've been in jail, but when I get out of jail, I'm gonna write a song about how I fucking hate the cops and how I wanna kill them. Can I do that? Probably not. But music is my outlet, and I'm gonna sing about that.
Yeah.
And that kind of, it resonates, you know, to what we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Michelle Handelman just wrote.
Yeah, I was gonna say too. I like what you said about
consequences.
And that's exactly it. I mean, we don't want to expose too much to the Zoom Moon surveillance machine, but yeah, art is our mask. We wear masks. We can do a lot behind it. We can use it as a shield, and we can also use it not just defensively, but offensively. And the consequences are dramatically different. Doesn't mean that artists don't get policed, murdered, and brutalized, and it doesn't mean our expressions haven't been taken away from us and renamed and incarcerated. Of course, that is also happening. Artists are not separate in a separate category from these, like, those who are coming from for humanity and call it humanity. But we do something else. It is a mask. It is a poetics. It is.
I almost feel like art is the real for me, and this is the mask. Like, you know. I guess it just matters, like, you know, it's all the same thing, really. We're just saying things in different ways. But I noticed Rafa took his mute off, so I'm curious what he has to say.
No, I'm just thinking about that sort of, you know, like I think artists not being separated in terms of like, you know, our proximity to our neighborhood, our communities, our families, but the ways in which art as an industry absolutely like separates us because of the sort of level of exclusivity in which we experience and make art, right? And so I feel like there's also like this really, just hearing you kind of like wax on art being the first language, I wanted to kind of like maybe think about movement, right? And the kind of language that movement is, and thinking about alchemy within your piece now, you know, which is the sort of like transformation process that happens by combining certain things, and combining already sort of alludes to there being like things that sort of like come together, right? And so to think about this moment and to think about things that are coming together and people that are coming together and thinking about solidarity and kind of like driving it back to movement, that feels like such a, in terms of art, I feel like I like to think about art as just like this kind of like maybe perhaps a mask where we could kind of like do things that we wouldn't be able to do like in real life. But maybe it's a little bit more blurry, where the art actually does, it is real. It is real life, like how you're saying now. And I think maybe our ability to adapt and our ability to kind of like be a channel, but also be like a frequency that can not only sort of like project and amplify an idea, but also amplify the works of others. That's something I've seen that's been like really incredible and beautiful and inspiring right now, is like seeing the amplifying work that artists have been doing, really kind of like, you know, kind of like modulating the sort of space in the world and our voices in the world to kind of like step back when we need to, and kind of like step in to kind of like lift an idea, a voice. Yeah, I'm just kind of like there's a lot that y'all are saying that's just blowing my mind right now. So trying to like throw it up back at you.
Well, one thing that Lupe brought up in the conversation we had leading up to the talk here was just this idea, and I think this relates to what MPA is saying and everyone else, whether it's explosive or formal, the artwork that Lupe is interested in this collective vein is simply to make the invisible visible. So I think that relates to some of, you know, what you guys are talking about here in terms of the collection. And Lupe talked about how when she first started collecting, there were no references for gathering information or images on this party scene, on where she grew up. There was no archive to go back to as a primary source, as people use in other types of research. So she created that through these anecdotes and through these stories that people told her on social media. And then before you know it, it became this giant, you know, expansive collection that made a lot of things visible that so many people can relate to and that they share, that would be siloed if there wasn't this archive out there that Lupe had created.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely about storytelling, you know, and humanizing an archive, humanizing objects and material. And because of that, then that tells a story, you know, and that is real. And yeah, I think about even like people and artists who influenced me, you know, like I talk a lot about Greg Bordowitz, who started ACT UP, and even poetry in general. I think a lot of artists use poetry to put out information, to speak out on issues. And that is how I wanted to treat this archive too. You know, it's like it is poetic. It is a way. It's written in a way that people can relate to it, because it's telling a real story.
Yeah, yeah.
I
want everybody to know we're going to move on now to the Q&A. We'd love to hear from our viewers any questions they have for Rafa, Nao, MPA.
Should we throw some music while we wait? Now. You're on mute.
Yeah.
People are probably ready to ask questions, but yeah, I'll put on some music too. I'll put on low.
Rafa, we have a question for you from Rigo. He'd like to ask you the meaning behind the clown face in your video.
Yeah. Well, the piece was working like also with the title, kind of like conversely in terms of the action and the word, but I was thinking about baboso, and baboso meaning like a literal translation is something that's kind of like, baba is like a kind of like it has a texture to saliva, but you can find baba on anything that's slimy. It's slimy. So it alludes to saliva, but it also is like a derogatory, like something that you'd use to call someone like dumb, right? But I was thinking about not knowing like what, in the early stages of the pandemic, like not really knowing like how to engage with public space, with people, and then also just kind of like feeling ashamed when I did things that I didn't know if were the right thing to do or not. And so playing literally with my own saliva that was collected over the course of the quarantine was kind of like just thinking about that, like thinking about the ethics of using this material that felt quite charged, that feels still quite charged because we're still in the pandemic. So yeah, just kind of like, it was a question. It was kind of like a question that was maybe framed around what's logical and what's like right or wrong. That's what I was thinking about.
Great. And MPA, you actually also created some really interesting effects with your video on your face. So there's some stripes, and then we have the green screen effect that creates this live image. Do you want to tell us more about how you designed that aspect of your piece?
I don't want to tell you more. Um, I was trying to get into what this video medium can do. And so I was stripping away. My process was I had a different scene set up. It got very costume folks. There was helpers. We were on board. And it just didn't work. And then maybe something I've learned as a maker is just to say, well, what is this? What is video? What can I do in video? So it got much more simpler of just presenting a portrait and wanting to explode that portrait, but kind of show, again, these dynamics around explosion, that maybe even the shit coming from a white ass could explode, but it doesn't die, it just sets off alarm signals. And those, you know, who then is the container, who's holding these alarm signals? And of course, this was a bit in confluence with just the environment we're in here in LA with the uprising, and also a land that really loves fireworks, and that there's this kind of actual soundscape going on, these bursts. And so with the effects, I think it was trying to be more playful and about what can get masked or what pieces stay on you. Like, let's say something does uprise or you can let go, but what still gets attached and you can't shake off.
Yeah.
How you reformat that, or something reformats it on you, and where these pieces just keep clinging on. That was a bit of the thinking.
And you had originally talked about this being the explosion of an emperor. And I think it's important to tie in the patriarch here in terms of some of the original ideas that you were working with. It may be different than what you ended up with for the final piece, but I do think that's an important thing to discuss, that was the fuse here in terms of the ideation of the work.
It was much more mythical, or I guess archetypical. So I was looking at emperors and the performers of emperors right now, like Trump or Bolsonaro, and thinking about what it would really be like to just let them explode. But I guess there's bigger projects I'm working on right now that are looking at this theme of how do you stop bullets with your minds? Like, can there be other energetic faculties we could awaken, right, to counteract violence, not with its own measures? Well, let me clarify. I think those are alive and very present in many humans on this earth, but I think a lot of us probably do still need to become awakened to those capacities. And so I think that's probably the more bigger chapter of thought that would feed into it. But yeah, I did start with an emperor.
Are you talking about superpowers? What are you talking about?
Yes, like telepathic capacities. And there
Like
is
ancient masters kind of stuff.
Yeah, or just as a teacher told me recently, a Buddhist teacher, I was like, wow. So, there's these stories of the Buddha. He could see quantum physics, molecules, atoms, I guess, before any human had technically rendered those, or we'd created lenses to really see them. Yeah. And so I was asking her, I was like, so have you ever met anyone who could move matter with their minds? And she was like, yes, actually I have. And I was like, man, so what was that person like? They must have lived on a mountain, no senses, devoted to a certain kind of practice. And she looked at me and she said, MPA, you learning love is stopping bullets with your mind. And I was like, oh yeah, I know, I get that. I get that, like, learning love and compassion and mindfulness, but really, what did they do? I'm still trying to make it this like physical plan. And she's trying to show me that the path, of course, that's not the path. It's not, you're going to climb to a special mountain. There's no special thing. There's no special place. It is, the path is not going to be delineated as a lot of us have been conditioned to think of path. There's a start and there's an end.
Yeah, and to lead with love. I wanted to mention a a question we have here for now, and I can just read it. It's actually from a colleague I went to grad school with, Nina Weissman, great artist here in LA. She asked Nao to say more about the idea of a cultural psychosis described as fetish. And I was also thinking about the sort of bridge you made inside of your work between the sourdough fetish we've been seeing online being kind of absurd, but also the love you put into that bread. So I'm just curious to hear more from you now.
The literal love. Well, I just, first I want to say that my work plays a lot with sincerity and ideas of sincerity. So it kind of plays the line of like, is she taking herself seriously? Is this lady for real? Like that kind of thing. So, I do take actual solace and pleasure and all kinds of, I have all kinds of feelings around cooking and food and baking for real. But I also feel like, yeah, that people are kind of using, especially like sourdough bread making, as a kind of almost like a burying your head in the sand kind of thing, that people are using that, and the kind of fire which it's caught, like I have a cousin who's a baker, so he gave me a sourdough starter. Really just like on a whim, like, hey, you want a starter? I was like, sure. And then I couldn't find any flour to buy. And I was like, what? Like I can't find flour. So then I texted him. I was like, hey, do you have any extra flour? So he dropped by some flour by my house, and we did like the mask exchange of the flour, and it was all very kind of clandestine, and it felt really hilarious, like the kind of also the kind of value that stuff like flour and sourdough starters all of a sudden were taking on, that there was like a different kind of value attached beyond like you couldn't even buy flour. Like there was a moment which it was really like the toilet paper thing, it was like another version of the toilet paper, the flour and the bread flour, all purpose and bread flour, like you could still get like exotic hard flours like buckwheat and stuff, but it was really hard just to get like all purpose or white or bread flour. So and that's all changed again. It's now widely available as the market kind of catches up to the desire. But I think that I'm not like trained to really understand kind of the nature of psychosis, or the kind of the professional frameworks around the language of psychosis. And so I can only tell, from a layman's point of view, I can only tell you, that my own kind of obsessive cooking when the pandemic first started had more to do with comfort food, like I was making like chicken and beans and tostones and all of this like really heavy food that was really delicious, and I was eating it and kind of like crying and feeling guilty and eating. And so there was this kind of aspect of like self-soothing that was happening. And I think that the sourdough, explosion, one, yes, it brings a kind of attention to non-GMO flours and small growers and that kind of thing, which is great. But I think it also kind of taps into this kind of fantasy around, caring for each other, which is, do you know how, like does everyone remember like that kind of maker space craze where everyone was gonna, like every 4 blocks there was gonna be like a digital printer, and you would just go there to get, the beam printed for that backyard edition you were gonna make or whatever. Like it's kind of it's kind of a non-industrial fantasy of like going back to these kind of methods where we could leave the factory and we could like, hold up in our cabin or whatever with our 4 besties, knitting our lettuce for our tacos or something. Like, what is this fantasy, this like, post-industrial fantasy? So I think it's all, it's all kind of feeding into this space. of like, and I think it has to do with this desire of like, you know, a simpler time or whatever. And a simpler time means a time where we don't have to look at sanctioned systematic violence against people. And so I think that, you know, in a way my work is playing with those ideas, and at the same time it's like, we do really have to find our own ways of transcending. We do have to find our own ways of moving beyond this moment together in ways that are supportive with each other, you know. And, you know, if that means baking sourdough bread, so be it. But, you know, like, you know, it's just, it's it's a complicated emotional landscape right now. And I think, you know, a lot of times my work is very, like I say in the video, it's, you know, it's raw. So it's not even figured out. Like, I don't figure out the work and make the work. I make the work to figure it out. And so my work is almost always going to feel like unfinished in some way, which means that it's like a flash of an idea that is then realized into a product that is then consumed or viewed, you know, by others. And those flashes or whatever are like kind of, you know, what MPA was saying, the unexplainable, or what Rafa was saying, like kind of elevating others' ideas, or sort of, you know, what Lupe is saying around like exploring the past, or exploring, you know, these different trauma sites. So I think that the way that my production works is it's a kind of an output that's filtered through my body or through my emotional bodies in a way. And then, so it's talking about a lot of different things, but then, you know, the vehicle for it in this case was sourdough bread. And also I've just always wanted to make an ASMR video. I don't think it was like fully successful on that level. I need practice. It was my first one, but I love that kind of video fetish in which people are listening in headphones and they're getting like the tingles and they're hearing all these different, you know, kind of sounds. And it's like, it's like relaxing to the nervous system. And so that kind of follow through, I guess that conceptual follow through into the physicality of the making of the video is also really important to me. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Nina.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we have to conclude here. We have just one more question for Lupe here. I don't know if you want to jump into that. I realize some of you may need to go, but Michelle has asked how this project connects to your previous work, and if this is a new beginning for you in terms of how you'll continue to work.
There's also
Yeah,
this
so I had
question about the entwining of the different storylines.
sorry, what?
Okay.
Sorry, I think I spoke over MPA.
I'm saying there's two questions, so that other person doesn't.
So the first question, I think by Michelle, I did, you know, what I was mentioning earlier when I first started this was that I've been photographing, you know, these like cinematic photos at night of Los Angeles. And about a year ago, people like production companies have been like contacting me to perhaps do like video work, a TV series or film. So I kind of started playing with this idea of like activating, you know, even these conversations that we're having. And so I feel like I want to continue working with film, with video. Again, you know, like prior to, or aside from working on these photographs, I've also been working a lot with sound and installation. So I almost feel like video ties everything together. One thing that I did find complicated in terms of like video and even like having people in these images or video is also being sensitive to people's, again, trauma. I know we've been using that word a lot, but, you know, even like if I were to work with a relative and if I want to hear their story or I want to include their story or have a conversation with them, it has to be a very sensitive topic, you know, because this is also teaching me that not a lot of people are ready to open up. And that is something that I want to be conscious about. So I hope that the work that I'm doing and that I continue to do, you know, empowers others, and also people can relate to what I have to say, what I want to share with others. So that's something that the work has been doing with the archive, and I hope that the video work that I continue to make has the same effect.
Excellent. That, I think, concludes our talk for the day. I want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been a really wonderful project. Thank you to Lupe for initiating the project. Thanks to MPA, to Nao Bustamante, Rafa, Esparza, and Zackary Drucker. This conversation will be available on LAN's website for further viewing. And we just want to thank everyone again for tuning in today.
Is the videos available now, or do people need a password still, or is it just available?
I believe the password has been removed, and you can view that video that you guys created on Vimeo, as well as on LAN's website on the exhibition page for Guadalupe.
Cool. And then it's going to be up for 2 weeks.
Yeah, through July 5th.
Yes.
June and July.
All right.
Thanks for
Yes.
creating.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Lupe.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
MPA.
both.
Where'd Rafa go? Is he here?
I just texted him. I think
Rafa had to
jumped
go.
Oh, bye,
He
Rafa.
just popped off. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It's been wonderful. Thanks to our
So
viewers.
many people we see in the chat. Miss you all. Stay safe.
Bye.
I want to still hang out. I can't hear you.
16 people are still here. 15, they're leaving. They're dropping off like flies.
Okay, they're dropping off. Okay, I'll drop off too. Love you now.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.